I call the July 11, 2022 school board meeting to order. It is 7:02 p.m. We are in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Newman, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yeah.
Mr. Phillips?
Present.
Ms. Willis?
Here.
Ms. Neufeld?
Here. Thank you. So opening this evening's meeting, we were preceded by an executive closed session. And this evening, we will also follow our regular meeting with an in-service. Public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Do we have anyone for comment on non-agenda items? Please state your name and address.
Thank you. John McCluth, 772 North 116th Street. I'd like to comment on the preceding closed session meeting that was held prior to this meeting, which was likely done in violation of Wisconsin open meetings laws. As noticed in the agenda, the purpose of this meeting was to discuss specific security measures and protocol with the Wauwatosa Police Department representatives. I find it quite shocking that we would be discussing security measures and protocols in closed session instead of discussing it in the open public. Why would we not want our families to know what procedures and protocols are being put in place for the security of their students? I would think this is something that we would clearly want our families to know, unless we are not doing something that we should be doing. The second part to this was to negotiation of a memorandum of understanding between the Wauwatosa Police Department and Wauwatosa School District. Again, this is something regarding the relationship between Wauwatosa Police and Wauwatosa School District. And I would think this is something, again, we'd want to know as in the public forum instead of being done in closed session. Preceding this, I was made aware that the representative for the police department was actually no longer going to be in attendance at that meeting, yet the meeting still took place with the only discussion with the memorandum of understanding. There is nothing in Wisconsin open records or closed meeting statutes that allow this exemption that I can tell, and it becomes clear. And setting the legal things aside, it becomes more and more disturbing that this body continues to do things in the shadows instead of clearly an open record with input and discussion from the public to be clearly informed as to what's going on. I ask you guys to reconsider the things that you are doing and make sure that they are done more clearly and transparent for the public viewing.
Thank you for your comment. Will there be anyone online?
There are people with their hands raised.
So, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
There are no people with their hands raised.
Okay, thank you. And on the prior meeting note, the board will be discussing the safety topic and memorandum of understanding in a open session to be scheduled. The next subject we have is election of school board officers. And with the resignation of school board president, board members will now vote to elect a replacement of all officers. Are we electing all officers?
I think the first step is for you to elect a president.
Okay,
Excuse me, right, you noticed replace the president. And then
if
the
a,
replacement
yes,
was taken from one of the existing officers to replace the officer. That's not all, is that right?
okay.
I understand how
Yes,
it's
sir.
gonna go, okay.
Okay, yes. So the action is with the resignation of the school board president, board members will vote to elect a replacement. If a current officer of the board is elected as the new president, a replacement to fill that position will then also be voted on.
That's it.
So, okay. So Dr. Means, then, would you
Yes,
like to commence the
yes, thank you.
process?
So board members do have ballots at their desks. It's a vacant officer position of board president. So the first step in the process is for you to either have someone self-nominate themselves or have a nomination for someone to run for board president.
Are there any nominations for president?
And you can just, I can take
It's
those.
by paper ballot, right?
Yes, I can take those papers out.
And just so I'm clear, we do not announce the vote count for the nominations, but we do announce the vote count for the actual
Yes.
election against the nominated. Okay. Now, we do need seven pieces of paper. Everybody needs, right. I did some legal research once upon a time, and there are 2 states that have declared that in a paper ballot, there must be a ballot for all present board members.
Three board members, there are 7 ballots. 3 board members have been nominated. Leanne Farley, Dr. Jessup Anger, and Ms. Greenfield.
I decline.
That leaves us with 2 candidates.
So this is the second round of voting.
So now you would actually vote. This is the actual vote for the 2 candidates, either Dr. Jessup Anger or Ms. Greenfield. And I'll take your ballot when you're ready.
He would have figured it out when he only had 6.
No worries, no worries. Okay.
Slide through.
Okay. A vote of 4-3. Dr. Jessup Anger has been voted as president. Dr. Jessup Anger, I believe you're currently the clerk. Is that accurate, sir? That's correct. So what that means based on our posting is that now we need to have nominations for the vacant clerk position.
Can you tell me who all the positions are right now? Or
Sure. So, Mr. Phillips is our current treasurer. Ms. Greenfield is our current board vice president. Dr. Jessup Anger was just elected board president, which leaves us with clerk that is vacant now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There were three board. Three board members were nominated: Dr. Hoig, Mr. Meyer, and Ms. Farley.
I decline.
Thank you. Do you accept the nomination?
Yes.
Do you accept the nomination?
I decline.
Are you sure you?
We've both been clerk. We want you to have this
Yeah.
opportunity.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think for record's sake, we should collect ballots. So if you can please vote. Unanimous vote of 7-0. Dr. Hoig is our new clerk.
So I'll just finish off the motion. Okay. So may I have a motion for Dr. Jessup Anger as president and Dr. Jenny Hoig as clerk?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Meyer moved. Ms. Fraley second. Is there any community comment on the board officer election? Seeing none in the room. Mr. Price, is there any online?
There are no hands raised online.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Newman, would you call the roll?
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Anger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Willis,
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld.
Yes. And Dr. Jessup Anger, congratulations. Would you like to switch spots or just take the gavel?
I will take the gavel from here. That's fine. Next up is the superintendent report. Dr. Means.
Thank you. Dr. Marble, may I ask for your assistance in directing the presentation from the captain's chair, I guess? As Dr. Marble is working on getting the presentation on the screen, I would just like to thank our strategic planning steering committee members once again for their hard work. They concluded all of their work in June 21st to be specific. Right now, our district administrative team, they're working on developing key performance indicators that were developed through the strategic objectives by the steering committee. So this is really a bottom-up strategic plan. I'm really pleased that we've heard from a lot of different members of our community in terms of what they would like to see with the strategic plan. Part of what they wanted to see was a 2.0 of our vision of a graduate. As you know, we're very proud of the vision of a graduate, but the feedback that we receive from our steering committee is that it's not measurable, that it's aspirational and very theoretical in nature. So, Dr. Marvel, when you look at the framework for our strategic plan, you'll see that our foundation is our mission, vision, and values that we'll be working on and showing you in a few weeks. And our steering committee created 5 goals. Again, those goals are academic performance, diversity, and inclusion. And I want to take the time to clearly state that in the past we had a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that had their own goals and objectives that they were striving for. We really felt it was important to embed our diversity and inclusion goals in the strategic plan. The third area was our social, emotional, and mental health. High quality staff was our fourth item, and our fifth item was culture and community. But there was another goal that emerged from these first 5, and that's operations. How are we ensuring that we're doing good work with our buildings and grounds, that we are adhering to timelines, that we're being strategic with our long-range facilities planning. So that goal has emerged as goal number 6. But in service of our students, our goals should reach and go toward what do we need to accomplish for every single student, so they are reaching the vision of a graduate. So what we've done, going to the next slide, is we've identified 5 areas of growth and opportunity for a student, a vision of a graduate that should be reached. Strong academic foundation. We want students who are good critical thinkers and problem solvers. We want people who are we want graduates who can identify who they are and have agency, not only in our classrooms and schools, but in the world. We want students who are socially, emotionally aware and can regulate themselves, and individuals who can collaborate and work in an independent state. And so when you look at those 5 areas, we've identified, and we actually have components that we can define in terms of what that means. It's not just theoretical, but it has a definition of what having a strong academic foundation, or being a critical thinker, or having identity and agency, and so on. We've defined what those things should be. So when you look at those 5 components, we can go to the next slide, Dr. Crumble, thank you. We've identified 10 milestones. Those 10 milestones include academic foundation. It includes all the components that you saw on the previous slides. And what we've done from a research standpoint is we've identified the fact that proficiency is the true marker when you look at academic performance. That's the true marker that students will persist through their first 2 years of post-high school efforts, be it in the military, in some type of apprenticeship, or even at a college or university. But we've also identified areas where students are able to demonstrate, again, the other components of the vision of a graduate, be it critical thinking, agency, collaboration and independence, or social emotional regulation. I won't read all 10 of the milestones to you, but we feel that this provides the school district now with measurements that will allow us to know if we're doing a good job in serving students individually or on the whole. It will demonstrate and keep us accountable to this board and community if we are truly living up to the aspirations of the vision of a graduate. It's not, we want to go beyond the aspirational component of it and have the board have metrics that you can hold us accountable for. So again, our strategic goals are outlined on this slide. I've read to you the 6 goals that we've identified. And when you look at next steps, the month of August, once the administrative team is done creating key performance indicators, we will then have a draft of a strategic plan that goes in the hands of the Board of Education for you to make the final revisions and modifications of this work, with the goal that we finalize our strategic plan and allow us to have a true guidance or North Star for this organization starting the 2022-2023 school year. This is all based on feedback and information and formal and informal conversations that I've had with many board members, community members, and obviously our steering committee. You've all asked for measurements of our work, not pontification, not aspirations. We believe that these milestones move us closer to allowing us to determine how we're doing as an organization, but more importantly, it gives you a governance monitoring tool to determine if we're doing our jobs well. We talked about hiring Ms. Susie Thomas last meeting. This will give us the ability to have scorecards that on a quarterly basis, we can come to you and tell you how well are we doing by school, by demographic group of students. We'll have the ability to develop an infrastructure where we can drill down and truly measure how well we're doing and where we need to invest. The last thing I will share with you is that this is an opportunity for us to really become surgical, if I may use that word, become surgical in where we invest our funds. And I've been telling our staff during my first year that identifying disproportionality and gaps is actually a good thing, because then it shows you where you need to invest your funds. So I'm really excited about these milestones, but I'll pause. I know Dr. Marble is excited about these goals as well, but we wanted to share this with you as we continue to put together what we hope to be a very strong draft of a strategic plan when you receive it in August.
I'm out of practice. Any questions or comments from the board?
I have one. If you back up a slide, two. You said there's going to be quarterly updates, so all this data will be refreshed on a quarterly basis?
Some of the data will,
Okay.
not all 10.
Like which?
When I look at it, our attendance data will clearly be there. Our citizenship data will be available on a quarterly basis.
What about STAR?
Our STAR data will also be available as well. So I would say at least 3 of the 10.
Okay. What about the other 7? How are we going to
Thank you.
progress measure the majority of them?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's more annual data that we receive. Right, Dr. Marquez?
I hear that. And I would like us to think about how we would know at the midway point how many kids are on track to score a 3 on the AP exam, even if it's that we're creating a sample midway through the year test that we feel like aligns. Similarly, ACT benchmark data. It's really hard for me as a board member to only get data once a year. I know we do assessments. I know the consistency of assessments is something you and I have talked about in terms of across the district, across schools, so that we know that students are getting the same high quality experience. So that was going to be the question that I asked is, how can we ensure that we're getting some data more than once a year and that we are ensuring that that data is consistent? And again, I'm okay personally, I'm only speaking for myself, if it is a district generated assessment, but everybody's using the exact same one so the teachers know where they have to be on content by a particular point in time, so that we actually have a better sense of where we're doing or where we are. This is just for my own clarification. This is a 3-year strategic plan.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then my second question is, I appreciate the ambitiousness of 90% in so many of these goals. Can you clarify that we're talking about not just 90% of all students, but we're talking about 90% of subgroups as well? And we're not just saying, okay,
Yes.
so we're saying 90% of students with disabilities, 90% of our kids on free and reduced lunch, 90% of our kids who are kids of color, et cetera. Because if so, kudos. That makes me really, really happy and wanting to be able to see where we are now against all those things, both in totality and subgroup would be really a great way, I think, for board members to be able to start the year, because we're talking about some pretty significant jumps here. So if this is 90% by the end of the third year, what are we talking about by the end of this year versus next year? I'd love if you can get to 90 this year. Awesome. But what is the goals? Are they district wide? Are they school based? Are they because we're talking about growth here. And for some schools, making those jumps may be harder than others, grades, et cetera. So I'm really excited about the data that we're looking at here. And I would just love us to see as a board, more versus less. And you don't have to totally overdo it, but if we could have this data quarterly, that'd be amazing.
I would just, if I may, I think the one caveat would be our special education population. We would want to work with Mr. Pinion and our director of special ed, Ms. Clem, to identify what percentage of our special education students who are eligible to reach the 90%.
Eligibility, absolutely.
Right, so that'll be important. But yes, every other subgroup that you, or student group, I hate to use subgroup. Every other student group that you mentioned, we're going to, our goal is 90%. We do have an incremental step for the 3 years. Our principals have been begging for these milestones because it's hard for them to develop school growth plans. Their request of the district has always been, so what do you want us to strive for? What is our goal? What's our North Star? And so it's the responsibility of the district to provide that North Star. And then I hope in August we can have a deeper conversation with you as a board in terms of those quarterly anticipatory assessments. What Dr. Marble and I want to be cautious of is not being accused of over assessing students. And so how we develop those markers that can give us indication if we're moving toward our goal will be important, and how long those assessments are, because I think that's something that we want to guard against people not. I appreciate what you're sharing. That's where we want to be as well, having some level of an assessment that can tell us where we're going, but we also want to balance it with, I know that our colleagues who are in the classroom and parents may say, don't over assess my child either. So we'll try to find the balance.
If I may just lift up that was one of the concerns of the strategic planning steering committee is overly assessing students. So just trying to be mindful of that balance that Dr. Means is talking of.
So can I just respond to that question? So do you think quarterly or biannual assessments is too much?
So the way that we have it currently outlined in our assessment plan draft is quarterly assessing students. So currently with the STAR assessment, we don't assess students in grades 9 and 10. So we're going to be expanding that into grades 9 and 10. So we have some more data on their growth throughout the year. And currently in grades 1st through 8th grade, we do assess students utilizing the STAR assessment 3 times a year. We're going to add it in 2 more times so that we have some additional data points. And the part of the reason why we moved away from MAP and 2-star is because that assessment takes less time than the MAP test does. So we are confident that we'll have some additional data points, but in the spirit of continuous improvement, we're going to use this year to study how it goes, and then we might need to make some adjustments moving forward if we're not getting the right data sets that we're looking for. Moving into the subsequent years.
Final question, I promise. ACT and AP, those are year-long courses? Could they not, could the midterm exam not be the gauge that we use for where we are against this?
For AP?
AP or ACT? Or sorry, just AP, because they don't take it, ACT.
So that is something we could look at with
every single kid would have the same test across the entire district.
Yep. So that may take a little bit of time for us to clean that up, but that is definitely something that we can look into. Absolutely.
By year 3, that's our goal.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Meyer.
So I'll try to provide some calendar specifics to why a mid-year assessment could be considered to be important. So this is a 3-year plan. And anybody cut in on me if I'm incorrect in something, right? A 3-year plan. Our administrators have 2-year contracts, and late in the first year, an additional year automatically renews. So administrators have an automatic extension on their contract. The mechanism to change administrators is by the end of January. If the board is not happy with an administrator, the board can vote to issue an intent to non-renew. Am I okay so far? So if we don't learn anything about performance of administrators until the end of year 1, all those administrators, when we find out how they are doing, will have 2-year contracts. So given that this coming year is year 1, a change in administrator without buying out a contract for large dollars, a change in administrator could not happen until year 4. So, for example, next spring, there's 4 board seats up for election. So on the day those 4 board members, some incumbent, some new, probably, who knows, on the day they take office, every administrator on board will have a 2-year contract. And if that newly elected board has a mandate from the community to change something, that board will have to wait until the 3rd year of their first term to make a change in administrators, which would be, I think, now math gets hard in my head at my age, but 4 years out. So now let's talk about teaching contracts. Teaching contracts are signed by state law. Teaching contracts must be signed by the end of April. So if we wait until the end of the year to find out how the teachers are doing, regardless of the performance of the teacher will have a 1-year contract on the day the board starts to look at the key performance indicators from the annual review. So in that sense, accountability to the goals here does not occur for teachers until year 3 and does not occur for administrators until year 4. So if we don't have some kind of mid-year barometer about how things are going, the board has as a practical, pragmatic matter, taken itself out of the accountability business for most of the duration of this plan. Now, I'm not saying we want to non-renew people, but I am saying that it's to me not acceptable to allow any midterm to not have some kind of mid-course indicator about are we going in the right direction or not before we sign a whole bunch of contracts and get locked in for a whole bunch of money until the third and the fourth year against the plan. Now, I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm just trying to lay out for people how set in stone things are. By the time we come to the end of a given year, everything's already decided for the next year for teachers. Everything's already decided for the next 2 years for administrators. So the board has precious little opportunity to assert itself, to change a direction without writing a lot of checks to buy people out, which of course we don't want to have to do. So I'm all in favor of any indicators we could get somehow before the end of January as best we can to see how we're doing. Thanks.
I would add to that, Mr. Meyer, maybe more importantly, we're another place where we have a significant role is the investment of where do we invest in things that are working effectively and how do we make sure we're advocating for it. I think that's a key piece.
If I may, perhaps we want to staff an additional role or an additional certification or a change in role or a change in certification. By the time we get to the summer, we're already locked in for the following year. And even, whatever we want to do, we have a 1-year delay on anything we might want to do because the money's already spoken for the following year. Yep, thanks.
So that's why we've made our goal all along has been to provide quarterly updates. And to Mr. Meyer's point, it's really hopeful. I'm hopeful based on the conversation we've had here this evening that you will be acceptable in us finding some level of balance. So we're not accused of over assessing students. And I would conclude by saying, Dr. Marble took the words out of my mouth. This is all part of our continuous improvement work. I know I've talked to many of you about implementation science and making sure that we're implementing and not just talking. And when you look at an evidence-based leadership framework, it's about having goals, but it's also about investing in people and making sure that we're providing the professional learning that we want them to have, that we're setting expectations. And I think this conversation this evening is very helpful to our team because the community and the staff, they're hearing clearly that this is your work. I tried to download everything you've shared and invested in the strategic plan. So I think people are hearing it. But we're committed to showing improvement because behind each data point is a child. Behind each data point, there's a child who has an aspiration and a goal of being that vision of the graduate we want for kids. So we're excited. We're excited about next school year. We've already changed the name of our early release days. They're no longer early release days, but they're PACE Wednesdays. And the PACE stands for we're going to prepare, we're going to align, we're going to collaborate and engage around the work of our kids. So they're no longer just early release days, but they're PACE Wednesdays. And we're going to use that time where teachers and administrators are, to Mr. Meyer's point, they're not just looking at it even quarterly. They're going to look at you've invested, this community is invested in those PACE Wednesdays. We have a lot of new administrators who they light up when we tell them every Wednesday we have time for our teacher teams to work in a collaborative environment. We don't want to waste that time. We want to make sure that we're looking at the progress that kids are making weekly. So then it's leading up to really good progress and growth. I think the last thing I would just share with you is that the messaging that we have been using internally is that this is about growth. And if we can make incremental growth, we will arrive at the performance that we want for the kids. that's outlined in the milestones.
I'm going to swing around to each of the different board members who we've heard from. So, Dr. Hoke.
Well, thank you so much for putting this together. These are obviously really, these are very lofty goals. So I appreciate that they are, we're setting our sights high. Is there a point, Dr. Marble, where we'll be able to see baseline data about this? And then are we using that data to start the school year, like to deploy resources to certain areas or schools so that we are setting our students up for the most success, knowing where those gaps exist already?
Yes, we have baseline data for all of these indicators minus the 9th and 10th grade STAR testing, because we have not done that in the past. So we will gather baseline data over this next year. And similarly, we don't have good citizenship mechanisms in every single one of our schools. Some schools do have it, but not all. So that's another pending data point that we will look to establish baseline data on. When the strategic plan is rolled out, we will have for the accountability assessments, we will have 2021 data until the state lifts the embargo on the 2022 data. And so once that is public, we'll be able to shift what is the current baseline into the 2021, 2022 data.
Mr. Phillips?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. So that will also tell us how we will allocate our resources to start out the school year. And then when we review that quarterly, will we also allocate resources based on some of the disparity that we see?
Yeah, so for example, our elementary academic specialists, we teased them originally, our reading specialists, they wore 3 different hats. They wore the hat of curriculum coordinator, curriculum developer, instructional coach, and then interventionist. So we have now teased out those 3 different roles. So we have an elementary ELA coordinator who solely works just on ELA curriculum coordination. Then we have 5 ELA instructional coaches that are assigned to 2 different elementary schools. And then the building principals are utilizing their data to deploy the instructional coach to the different teams and or individuals whose data is showing that there needs to be some additional assistance to help move A, B, or C. So that'll be more of a building-based decision. And then with the academic specialists, those individuals are really looking at the intervention work in which students really need additional support in reading or math at the tier, we call it the tier 2 or the tier 3 level. And so those used to be, again, all reading specialists. There's 1 reading specialist at each and every elementary school. And some needs are just more extreme in some of our buildings than in others. And some students were not getting the services that they really needed to the extent that they needed because there was just no time left over with the 1 individual that was in the building charged with those 3 different tasks. So we have now made them agents of the district. So we can look at our data moving into fall here from the spring to see which students were getting tier 3 interventions, which ones were getting tier 2 reading interventions, for example, and we can now deploy those individuals into the buildings as necessary. So there might be 1 elementary academic specialist that spends all of their time at 1 particular building because of the need. And then there might be then that 1 individual might travel over to 1 other building because there's 2 or 3 kiddos that need additional services and support. So it allows us to be a little bit more flexible rather than having individuals anchored to a particular building. Mm-hmm.
And I guess, so similarly, how are you going to measure like SEL needs and deploy those resources?
So we have the annual survey data to look at that. I would turn that over to Mr. Pinion. I don't know that he's prepared this evening to answer those questions, but it will be a partnership where he will be looking at different data. I'll just
We
speak
have a
for him
student,
perhaps.
we have a
but-
student engagement survey that we've been using. I'll step in for you, Luke.
Thank you.
And then we also have the youth risk assessment that we utilize every year. So between those data points, we have areas where students are sharing with us where they feel secure, and where we can do, and I think this is really important, where we as the adults can do a better job in helping them feel secure. So none of these data points are about kids failing or succeeding. It's really about where we need to your point, I love your questions, where we need to deploy the support so then children can be the very best they desire to be. Mr. Pinion,
You did a great job answering that, Dr. Means. That's one of our first tasks of our team and people in family supports is to unpack and look at the data that we received from last year around that student engagement piece and really hone into the high leverage pieces we want to keep tabs on and bring to the board and kind of look at those year by year as we deliver those surveys.
Thank you.
Can I ask another question about
Dr. Holmes, yeah.
specific to that? So that youth-based survey, that's really for high school students, right? The youth-based risk.
The youth risk behavior survey
Yeah.
that's done, I know the state does it every other year on the odd years, but that is secondary, so 6 through 12.
6 through 12, okay. And do we, in our student engagement survey, does that go down to our elementary students? Okay.
Ms. Bufeld.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. One thing, I don't see it attached to board docs. I'm not
No.
sure if it, okay,
We
so,
will.
okay, good. Yes, thank you. I mean, the public can see it, but, so my questions are really around next steps and how the board is going to be involved and how we're going to wrap up and vote. So can you explain that process, the work that's going to happen, and, are we on schedule?
I think we are on schedule right now for the board to review the strategic plan, which includes these milestones. We initially had put aside the date of August 17th to be strategic planning work. It's our goal to have a draft of the strategic plan, including all of these metrics available for you, at least baseline data to you by August 1st. So that gives us about 2 weeks or so to complete our work, where there's a deadline that I've asked our team to develop finalize their key performance indicators by July 15th. So we'll revise those. It's been a hard timeline because many of our new staff started July 1st. So I immediately said, and by the way, I need this really important work by July 15th to stay on the timeline. But no, I'm optimistic that we will have a draft to you by August 1st.
Mr. Meyer.
This is as I've been sitting here trying to absorb everything that's said. So likely this is a silly question, and I don't know anything about the practical realities about what might be possible for an answer. So I'm just going to stick my neck out here and ask the silly question. Given that we don't want to overassess, and given that many of our commitments to staffing are made between January and April for various reasons, in various perspectives, as we set contracts and set budgets, are there any of these indicators that we could effectively have on a calendar year cycle by student instead of on a school year cycle? Like attendance for a student from January 1st through end of December. I understand that student changes grades and might even change buildings and teachers and all that stuff, but are there any of these indicators where we could align the assessment cycle with our staffing decision-making cycle?
Well, I believe that once you solidify and pass the strategic plan, that the data that we produce on a quarterly basis will inform what we bring forward in terms of our initiatives that we would like to have funded for the following school year.
Okay, well, that'd be wonderful, but I'm willing to, and for my comment, give and say, hey, if there's something that as a practical matter, to avoid overassessment, it really needs to be an annual metric. Then I could accept that, okay, well, for 2022, we'll only have 6 months, and then we're going to start our 1-year cycle to get our results in December. Now, I don't know if you have quarterly data, wonderful, that's great, love it, but I'm trying to hear the feedback you're giving to us and try to be open-minded to some accommodation, and at least for what I think as the outlook. Thank you.
As the educators, we would say we would prefer quarterly, but we're acknowledging that there are some teachers, there are families, there are some students who will feel that that's too much. So we want to have a thoughtful conversation with you on how to find the right spot. But I'll step out of it from an educational metric standpoint. From a governance monitoring tool, you need quarterly. All the research, all the literature around effective school boards state that effective school boards are consistently discussing student performance. And the only way you can discuss student performance is if we are accountable to you by giving you quarterly data. And being accountable to you, so going back to your first statement, Mr. Meyer, and being accountable to you in that we're showing incremental growth. I think those are really critical components to this discussion.
Thank you.
Any other board comments or questions on this item?
Dr. Jessup Anger. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Marble. She answered more questions than she was anticipating to do. So I just asked you to help with the slide. So thank you for answering some of the questions. I think Dr. Hoy made the comment that I think is really important, and that I want to brace everyone now, because Dr. Marble and I've seen the data. I would say that these are not lofty goals. These are not. These are goals that when you sit down, I like to always say that these are the Hoy pool conversations. When you talk to a group of parents at the pool, they are assuming that their child are hitting these milestones. That's the expectation that they have. When people buy homes and pay their taxes, they are expecting that this is happening. And when people compare our district to other districts, they're using this lens. We're not where we want to be. When we show you the baseline data, it's not where we want to be in overall. And then when you disaggregate the data for certain student groups, it's even lower. So we have a lot of work to do. But I think I'm optimistic in that we have a framework to even have the conversation. When you look at milestone number 10, again, I know that for this board and for this community, diversity, inclusion, and equity work is critical. That's why I was so excited to be here. We've embedded this work in our strategic plan. It's not a standalone. I think in other districts, the diversity plan is a standalone from the strategic plan. So we want to look at what is the demographic makeup of our theater productions? What's the makeup of our student council and our student government? I wanted to point out to you that I really am optimistic that this is going to allow us to get to some of those diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations. Candidly, your appointment of Susie Thomas is just as our director of data quality analytics is as vital as hiring Ms. Holland as our director of diversity and inclusion. Because if we don't have the right data to show to our educators, here's the work we have to do, here are the children that we're leaving behind, then it's for naught. Some people have been teasing me in the Fisher building, but on one of our whiteboards as we walk out of the building, I've started to say, here's the countdown until the children come back. The children are coming. The children will come back to school on September 1st. We have 37 days to get ready for it because they're depending on us to hit these lofty goals. And some people will call lofty goals. I think it is what I affectionately have always thought Wauwatosa to be, which is one of the premier districts in this state. But we can't make that claim unless we can show it from a data standpoint. So we have a lot of work to do, but I wanted to share with you that we're not hiding. We want you to hold us accountable through these milestones and strategic plan.
I'm excited that we've got a plan and we've got some milestones to track our capacity to rise to the expectation of the community and all of ourselves. One of the things I'm curious about as we go to, and I think these might be different than milestones, but certainly looking at baseline, kind of showing growth at in the different components of that at the school level, the grade level, demographics, and so on. I'm also curious about one of the things that parents are curious about is that they want to know, like, their kids are not just hitting baseline, but how are they kind of achieving? You used the phrase earlier, achieving their best self or their best outcome, and how are we kind of that may be a little bit stickier thing to track, but I'm curious kind of what the team might have going forward of how do we measure, how do we track, how do we understand whether or not students are being supported in achieving their academic expectations. And so whether it's theirs, whether their capabilities, there's a lot of responsibility for the student on that as well, having been one of those myself at one point of achieving that. But how are we putting supports in place so that we are making sure that they aren't having to overcome barriers on their own, and that we are doing everything we can to support their success. So that's one of the things I'll be curious in hearing from the team going forward as well.
We have an answer. I'll save that for our next conversation.
Outstanding. I believe our next agenda item is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Ms. Riley?
I just had a question, and I think it was that the name caught my eye again. We had Tyree Gamble, who is a coach, on the last consent agenda, and I didn't know if there was any difference between this one and that one, or if it was just a duplicate. The only difference that I saw was this one said, oh no, they're both the same. The other one looked a little different. They both said July 1st, 2022. I'm just trying to figure out, is this on for a second time because something changed? If that makes sense.
I do not believe so. I think this is a little bit of the lag of the transition in the Division of Human Resources.
Got it.
Sorry for the error. Yep.
All good, because the other one was down. Got it.
I'm learning to allow other people to answer the question. I don't have to answer all the questions. So thank you, Ms. Elizas.
Absolutely.
Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Yes. Thank you. Any board comment on the consent agenda? I have only one. I'm very excited about one of the hires. One of my daughter's kindergarten teachers is now back in the district and it was outstanding. And I was just delighted to see that she's returned to Wauwatosa after taking some time away. So very, very exciting. Any community comment on the consent agenda? Jamie, anything online?
We have one hand raised. Kendra Kovar, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Actually, I have a question that goes back to the vision of a graduate. My question relates to Mr. Myers and Ms. Fraley's comments in using tests and scores to evaluate the success of the teachers and the building administrators, to check and see if we've met milestones of the vision of a graduate. I'm also wondering if we're going to be using those tools to evaluate building administrators and teachers. And I brought this up at the last meeting too. I'm just wondering what tools or scores would be used to evaluate other positions in the district and how successful they are in helping meet those milestones on the vision of a graduate. And those roles would be directors, coordinators, coaches, officers, chiefs, and specialists. I'm just wondering what tools we're using to see the impact they're making, which then end results in the vision of a graduate meeting their milestones.
Kendra, thanks for your question.
Thank you.
A reminder that this is only on the consent agenda. We will have an opportunity to close, to come back for any comments or any comments that folks might have. Jamie, are there any other questions or comments?
There are no other hands raised.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Hoig?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
No.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Willis?
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld?
Yes.
And that passes. Our next item up is academic performance reports. Proposed purchase of computers at the West High School Art Studio.
Logged out here. That's for the site. We should go.
To fill the time, I think it's ironic that this is about a technology agenda item.
Yes, that was going through my head as well. We're good. We're getting there. It's always fun, you know, it's when you're working with it. It's working as it should. I turn over my spell. Okay, I'm clicking and opening things I shouldn't here.
Hello, my name is Jessie Bellick, and I'm the art department head at Test. So thank you for the presentation this evening. The you're about to hear was created in collaboration with Beth Kimmel, Instructional Technology Coordinator, and Jamie Price, Director of Technology. So the art department at Tosa West, I've enjoyed actually hearing the vision of a graduate again, because we very much pride ourselves on helping students with their college preparations and career readiness. So a big piece of that involves technology. The art world is becoming increasingly digital. So when we help students with college admissions portfolios, it's all digital art. When we help them with submitting to AP, it's all done digitally. And so it's really important that we help students with digital literacy, but also really becoming adept at software. So currently the art department is sharing a computer lab with Tech Ed and Launch. What we're finding is that it's just a little difficult with 7 hours in the day for 3 departments to share a lab. So there's just a practical aspect there. But also what we're finding is that the software needs for art students are just a little bit more taxing on the current computers we have. So it's not unusual for an art student to run multiple software at one time, and these are also pretty heavy visual software. They will toggle between these. Currently, we're finding the computers we have are lagging or freezing and things like that going on. I would say about 1/3 of our curriculum uses computers heavily, and with the opportunity to have a lab, we could have courses that maybe seem unexpected use that computer as well. For example, a class like ceramics, even though students are working 3-dimensionally, they will have to photograph their work and really create a professional visual output to submit to things like colleges and AP. So it will be used extensively by art students. I think we can even skip that one too. It's okay. I get some background. Oh, okay. So yeah, I think I kind of covered that though. So in looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of this proposal, I was able to, oh, I guess I should go back to this. Okay. So the goals of having this lab dedicated to art students really are that we can prepare them. I was able to reach out to several grads and ask them just what their experiences were like in college. Did they feel prepared by our art program? And even those who had graduated and are now in creative careers, what was their experience with technology? So many of them indicated they were using Apple products in college, suggested that it would be helpful to have learned that a little earlier to beat that learning curve. So our goals are really to help them get more adept at that type of computer, but also software. We want to create a contemporary approach to visual art teaching in high school, encourage students' creative and lateral thinking, and not have the technology be a barrier to what they can accomplish. So when a computer freezes, it kind of, cuts that creative flow. And so we definitely want to avoid that, should we be able to. It's very easy to share work with others when we have got that whole lab dedicated to the art program. And so I think all of those things would really be supported by this new technology we're proposing. I was able to order one Mac Studio computer, which is a newer Mac offering. What's great about this machine is that it has an M1 processor, which means that I was able to run 3 different Adobe softwares at the same time. I did not find that lagging or freezing or anything like that happening. I was also able to use a digital drawing tablet, and it was responsive. So I, again, wasn't having that lag as I was digitally drawing, which was really nice to work with. The weakness of this machine is that it's not an all-in-one unit. So we would have to additionally buy monitors, keyboards, computer mice to get it all set up. But I do think the opportunity to prepare our students is going to outweigh that weakness. One glitch in the plan for starting us up the beginning of this next school year is just the worldwide shipping delays. Should we be able to order these right away? We're hoping that they'd be there very shortly after school starts, if not before. And we are preparing a space so that we've got everything in easy workflow for students. And I do have a backup plan if the computers are not here in time. So yeah, our timeline is essentially, if possible, to order computers as soon as we can, to get the room completely set up and usable, and again, that easy workflow for my students. There's a good number of classes offered first semester that would be using the machines pretty actively, but again, there would be an opportunity for other courses to be able to get into that space as well. And there would be other courses in semester 2 that would also use the technology. I believe that kind of covers all of the basics that I wanted to present to you. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
In full support of your request, I would like to add, you commented that the art world is becoming digital. I submit to you that the digital world is also becoming increasingly demanding that art be included in business communications. It is just phenomenal how much an advantage a person in the business world has by being able to creatively, artistically compose communication documents with some artistic flair to them. It really helps them.
Yes.
So
yeah, to visually communicate.
I would encourage all young people interested in business to consider your offerings in the art world to help them in their business endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Hope?
I know one of the things we've talked about kind of more globally as a board is trying to have certain groups weigh in when we're going to be making kind of these shifts. I appreciate that you reached out to some of the alumni so that we're getting kind of that student perspective. The only group I don't see kind of that we've talked about before that I don't see represented here is our special education or disability advocacy group. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity where we can reach out to them, kind of get their input about this particular purchase before we proceed.
Yeah. Just to address that briefly, one of the things that I have found in working with students with disabilities digitally is that especially some who have kind of like a sensory, it's a little hard for them to maybe get messy or touch clay or, things like that. The computer is really engaging and it's really been a bright spot in their day. And so I absolutely would, yes, support reaching out and finding out how that those staff could maybe even give me more ideas and more ways that we could support that group of students. But yeah, I have found a lot of success in the past. So thank you.
So just to clarify, so students with disabilities have just as much access to these courses as the general ed students?
Yes, they do. Absolutely. Yeah.
Ms. Fraley?
A couple technical questions. So is this already in the budget? Do you know? Is this already in the budget? So this is not on top of what we've already talked about.
No, we have a line item for this purchase.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Question number 2, from like an equity perspective, does East already have a computer lab that looks like this? So we're making it equitable across the district so that there's just the same opportunities as at East as at West?
Yes. East just, I believe last year, got a brand new set of Mac computers. Yes.
Great. And I'm curious, what did you learn from them in terms of like what they wish they would have done differently?
That is a really good question. The only thing they had indicated to me is that, so this Mac Studio is a release that happened after they chose their model.
Okay.
So they kind of had said, you're coming in at a great time because that is going to be a really great machine to just handle, especially animation, which is such huge files that take so much processing. So that was the only thing they had kind of said, like you're fortunate to come in at this time if this works out, because that will really be the machine that can do everything we need.
And do we have a sense of like how often we would need to rotate these in? I mean, I know Macs are, Apples are great and everything, but I feel like they get outdated very quickly in terms of like storage and capacity and all that kind of stuff.
Jamie, do you want to speak at all to the life of these machines?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Generally, we also need to take into consideration the operating system life and the security and the support that comes with that. So while the hardware may certainly last a lot longer than 4 years, we generally tend to approach things with a 4-year lifespan because, like I said, from a support and a security perspective, especially a security perspective, we don't need to be cutting edge, but we need to operate within the realm of functionality from that regard. And then also, it'll reach a point where the devices themselves don't receive the proper updates, and the applications that Ms. Balich is using require certain operating system versions that, usually we'll find beyond that 4-year mark difficult to align.
Great. And then final 2 quick questions. About how many students would you say over the course of a year would end up working on these computers?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. Yeah. So I would say our average class size is anywhere from 25 to 30. I'd say probably more in the 25, 26 range. So in semester 1, I've got 6 courses running that will be using the computers pretty heavily. But other students, we really have an open door policy in the art program, meaning if you've got a study hall, come on in. Like you
that was going to be my next question, because my kids never got to take art, despite how amazing the art program, because they were music and language, and every year I go to the art show and I'm just amazed at what y'all do. So that was my last question.
Yeah, no,
Will other people have access to these computers?
Yes, we love to have them, come on in and use that study hall time and support them the best we can.
Great. And then final thing, I'll just say whatever you can do to be recruiting students who are not traditional art students, be it students with disabilities, students who, maybe just haven't done art in their first or second year of high school. It's just such an incredible program.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, really. Keep sending us stuff.
Yeah.
Send the board stuff.
Just a quick comment from me. I have a parent of a child who's studying film at university. 90 or 80% use Macs. So she did not get that experience, and so they teach 8, and then they come to the 2, which is one is her, and to tell her how to do it on a PC. So this is really cool. I think it's a good leg up for the students. Thank you.
Any other final questions or comments from the board? If not, I think we'll go on to our next report and take community comments at the close of the 3 reports. Textbook subscription renewals. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Okay. So I don't have a slide deck prepared for this evening. I wasn't intending on having one. It's really just taking a look at the executive summary that you all have access to and seeing if you have any questions around the textbook renewal subscriptions that we have in front of us. Just to give a quick little overview for those online and in the boardroom, we have 3 different textbooks that are coming up on to expiration dates for their access through our publishing partners. One being English 10, another being Advanced Placement Calculus A, B, and BC, and then 6th, 7th, and 11th grade access to their online textbook. So that gets us to a total of $120,000. $120,675.80. Again, all of the executive summary is online for anyone who would like to take a look at it. All of these texts were part of the last time that these particular courses went through a curricular revision process. And so in accordance with policy 2210, there was a vetting process that the different committees that brought forward these different texts at that approval process went through to select these texts. So this is really to keep our students and our teachers having access to these textbooks for the next several years.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
I have a question. So these are all online textbooks?
That's correct.
Are there physical textbooks available for students, maybe with learning differences, who don't do so well with access to online grant?
They do have some physical elements as well. So yes.
Like the complete text. I mean, would they have access to the complete text in a physical?
I would have to double check with, I don't have that information off the top of my head, but I do know that you're able to print as well. So if a student needed a physical copy of some sort of particular text, that they could also print it as well.
And you're unable to answer that confidently because some of our textbook companies have moved away from even creating a hard copy.
That is correct.
Of the digital version.
That is correct.
And they've been advising schools to actually print the actual digital access copy.
And part of the reason for why many of our curriculum committees that go through the review process tend to prefer the online version is because it can be differentiated for a variety of student needs. And also it updates in real time. So if there's an error that the publishing company catches, they can update that in real time. Whereas if you go to print, then it's locked in.
Sure. Just making sure it's accessible. I think teaching virtually during COVID really, shined a light on, some students who struggled with online access, virtual access to stuff, rather than having a physical copy. So even having that print element, just making sure that it's accessible.
Thank you.
Seeing no other comments, thank you very much. The next item is the EDIS license renewal.
So again, the executive summary is available to you online and to anybody else that would like to take a look at it. Edis is our data warehouse that we're utilizing currently and have been since 2017 to help us manipulate data to drill down to the different subgroups of students that we are collecting data around. So with the AP exam, forward exams, ACT, Aspire, our PALS assessments are in there. We can look at behavior, attendance, all of that information is there. With our Director of Data Quality and Analytics, Ms. Thomas, joining us, she will really be integral in going through a formal audit of this platform to see whether or not this is the appropriate platform for us as a school district to be utilizing, because we have not done that since its implementation in 2017. So that'll be one of the areas that I will task her with doing moving forward, so that when we get to this point next year, we can either come forward with, yes, we want to be continuing with the Edis platform, or here are some other options that we think would be better meet our needs, so that we can have the different milestones in a comprehensible fashion presented to you along the way as well. So this proposal is to renew this product for the price of $28,800 for the next school year, fully knowing that we will be doing a review of the product with our data quality expert moving in next week.
Any board comments or questions on this item? And a reminder, these are all reports coming this week. 2 weeks from now, they will come back as action items for the board for consideration. So kind of key questions that may come up between now and then can be directed to Dr. Means or Dr. Marble. Ms. Riley.
An extra question. So Dr. Means, will Edis be what's used to give us the quarterly data?
It will be, and I think Dr. Marble said something that's very important. We're going to analyze and see if Edis is the right tool. Mr. Meyer said it earlier, so that how to visualize the data and to put it in a way where the scorecards are easy to download should come from our data warehouse. We shouldn't have to create more work. We have some questions about Edis, but we did not feel that this was the right time to look at a new tool. We have Ms. Thomas coming in. So we know that there are other tools available that will help us visualize our data. This is a 1 year holdover. I would suspect that you will see an RFP of some sort go out for this type of service, and we hope Edis will continue to evolve and show growth with their tool, but there's a possibility we'll bring forward another recommendation to you as well.
Thank you. Any community comment on this item? This would be inclusive of the proposed purchase for the computers at West High School for the art studio, textbook subscription renewals, or Edis license renewal. Jamie, anything online?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you all for your presentations. We look forward to getting any questions answered between the meetings and voting 2 weeks. Next up is our technology department reports. First one is Microsoft Services Renewal.
That would be me. I'm actually going to bring up the executive summary on the screen because the price tag on this one is a little bit high, and there might be some questions as to why we do this renewal. When we first brought this product in, or this subscription service in, I believe Ms. Mufeld and Mr. Meyer were the only ones that were on the board. we use, and I'm not going to go through it verbatim, I'll just summarize, but we use Microsoft services quite a lot in the district. While Google applications are sort of like the front facing and the easy to use. Am I creating that feedback loop? I think we're good now. Well, Google is sort of like the front facing and the one that most people, teachers and students are familiar with. We do actually have a lot of Microsoft products running in the background, especially on the operational side, but also with the students as well. Tim, can you mute something there? I'm getting feedback on this. I believe it might be the laptop, maybe the presentation laptop. So ultimately, we've got about 1,200 devices in the district that run Windows operating systems, Microsoft Office programs, etc. Am I the only one getting that feedback loop, or can you guys hear it in the room?
Not hear it in the room.
Just you, Jamie.
Okay, I'll just ignore it and keep going then. So in 2012, we were faced with having to upgrade Microsoft Office and Windows operating system versions. And Microsoft really has a program where education can subscribe to those services at a discount. So we evaluated financially whether it was better to purchase licenses or enter an annual license subscription agreement. So what I've got in that executive summary just shows here that, you know, it's around every 3 to 4 years that Office desktop operating system and the server versions update in their major versions, which would require another purchase. And then I really just threw together some numbers to say, here's what it would cost if we were to go to Windows 11, Office, Server, etc., and buy those licenses up front. The number would be about $336,000 or $84,000 a year using the 4-year rotation window. However, if we do the subscription program, it turns out to be $52,000 a year or $208,000 over a 4-year period. So when we look at that, you know, the price difference is quite substantial. We can see here over 4 years, $336,000 if we were to buy it and renew every 4 years, $208,000 on the subscription model, saving us $127,000. Stretching that out to 5 years, there's still a $75,000 a year savings, or a $75,000 total savings, I should say. And even in year 6, if we were to really stretch it out, which I really wouldn't want to do, but if we were to stretch those things out to 6-year renewals, we're still at a financial win. However, it's quite slight at that point. They have changed their license plan, where before it was an open value agreement, and now it's a monthly agreement, but you pay for it a year in advance. And much like Google services, Microsoft has A1, which is this tier of services, okay? And this is the free stuff, but we can't survive on the free stuff. We can't operate with the free stuff, not especially from an operational side. So we are, in this map, there are 2 other tiers. There's Microsoft 365 A3, and then there's A5 as well. We are proposing that we do the A3 version, which is more or less the equivalent of what we have now, but there are also some other security features in there, specifically multi-factor authentication that we can turn on. We're going to do that with the staff, Defender, and a few other features in there as well that are going to enhance our security, all with a view to laying a foundation to investigate at least moving up to A5 at a later date. But that's not part of this proposal. I'm just giving you a heads up here. Interestingly, with A5, it also includes Power BI Pro, that if Susie Thomas decided to develop a system or a data warehouse with Power BI, that would be included in that licensing as well and make that no additional cost. So that's basically the crux of it. The request is that this year we just renew at a cost of $52,198.80. That really is a negligible increase. I think it's less than $1,000 over what we've had in previous years. And that's that negligible increase that we see every year. Before I move on to the Blackboard one, are there any questions on the Microsoft services renewal?
I'm not seeing any from the board, Jamie.
Okay. And then the other one, I'll follow Ms. Marble's lead on that, is just for Blackboard renewal. That's actually two products that are both less than $20,000, but they're both going to the same vendor the same provider. One of them's for our website and the other one's for our mass notification systems. And that's just the renewal. With the caveat that we are actually going to look at both of those platforms this year and in conjunction with Ms. Fertitta to see if we want to move away from those to something that is more suited to our current environment. And that's all I have.
Any questions from the board on the second item? Ms. Bufeld?
Thank you. No question, Mr. Price. Very thorough. Thank you.
And Jamie, I'm excited that they let you out of the basement.
Actually, no one's in the house, so I'm in my kitchen right now. I'm just hoping the dogs don't start barking.
It's good to see you. Any community comment on either of these two technology department reports? Seeing none, we will move into public comment. Final public comment on any agenda items or items not on the agenda. Jamie, I'm not seeing any in the room. Is there any online?
No, there are no hands raised.
May I have a motion to adjourn into an in-service to discuss future board work? As this is a working session of the board, no public comment will be entertained at this session.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Freeland. Ms. Bufeld, thank you for the second. Any board discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Willis?
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld?
Yes.
Let's take 5 minutes and we'll come back. We are in in-service, which by intention is meant to be much more conversational and discussion-based. I am not particularly prepared this evening to lead this in-service. So my proposal is we kind of cover some really short-term discussion of what some of these future meetings are going to be that's up on the board right now. And then I'd like to convene with Dr. Means and come back to do a similar in-service into the future, but just am not in a place, I think, stepping into this role unexpectedly this evening to be able to lead us through this conversation effectively. And so just like a little bit of time for that. Yes, sure.
Thank you. So I'll just explain that based on some feedback, we agended this tonight so that the board would have an opportunity to speak on agenda topics that they wanted to see in the next 60 to 90 days. So there's a lot of work to be done. And what we had heard from the board at the last meeting was prioritizing what topics should we take, when, in what order. That was along the lines. And I know this is new. We've not done this before. But that was the spirit in which we created this session, to be very narrow only through September and to talk about the important work we had to do and the dates we had available to do that work. So we're very narrow tonight on just agenda topics and dates and any like roundtable on other agenda items that the board wants to make sure come forward between now and September. Does that help? So Dr. Means put together a tentative future meeting schedule on the hold dates we gave the board for special sessions, which are outside of the regular meeting dates. So we also have regular meeting dates that we could consider for some of the topics. And I guess maybe I'll ask Dr. Means to speak on the sequencing.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Considering some of the topics that have been discussed in the boardroom in the past, the August 1st date has been confirmed, and there is general counsel from WASB, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, Mr. Barry Forbes, will come and provide his general overview of how he advises board members to deal with open meeting laws and open records, what statutes the board should pay attention to as it pertains to these types of topics that have been discussed earlier in this district. Then Mr. Dan Nerad, who came and worked with the board this fall, has agreed to come back and discuss just go over roles and responsibilities of the board, and what does the statute state, what does the literature around the key words of school boards and the Lighthouse school board project that came out of the state of Iowa in regards to what does research show the attributes and characteristics of a high achieving school board. He plans to go over those topics on August 1st. On August 17th, if we're going to stay along with our timeline of having the strategic plan ready for the first day of school, you have a board meeting on August 22nd, where we're hoping that you would approve the strategic plan at that point. So we would want to utilize the 17th to really do a deep dive on the strategic plan to make sure that you're in a good place. I'll come back to some of my concerns with these dates. On August 23rd, if the board approves the strategic plan on the 22nd, I think many of the items that you will want to discuss or you anticipate that you need to discuss will be embedded in the strategic plan. And what the vision is that if we could talk about what do you want specifically from a board's perspective on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis in terms of governance tools, we should have the ability to finalize that work on the 23rd to give you the ability to truly keep us accountable. I'll use that word again around the achievement of the strategic plan. There's also, you should evaluate me. I'm your one employee, and that process of having the ability to deliberate and discuss the component of my performance should be on your radar. September 19th was the fourth date that the board identified as and this was prior to Ms. Willis, so, but you identified that was a common date that all of you would be available. To date, if we do our work well, that's an open date where you can continue to have discussions. My recommendation would be that we discuss policy and what that work should be, but I didn't want to presume that I would have a voice in how you're going to use your time. But my recommendation to the board would be that we discuss the role of policy, how you're going to go about developing policy moving forward.
Oh, okay, so I have, sorry.
Just whenever I have.
Okay, so I have, on my list too, I had policy work, how to work together protocols, committee structure. That was something that was coming up. How do we better create a community feedback loop? But I don't think we can have that session until we've had the board governance session, which includes open meetings and ethics and, so, and that could happen, that actually could happen at one of our regular board meetings in August, right after the board governance, possibly.
Yes.
How to communicate better. Can we use electronic communications in some way, shape, or form? And what would that look like? But the policy work is key because we have some key deadlines, even from the CLA audit, that are October 1st.
So I think in lieu of you having a deeper conversation around how the board wants to, if you recall, in May, there was a discussion that you had on if you wanted to look at policy as a committee of the whole or to have a subcommittee, if you will. I think that those types of conversations will emerge either on August 1st or August 23rd. But to your point, Ms. Greenfield, you also have the ability to discuss these items on August 8th and August 22nd, which are your regularly scheduled board meetings, the 8th and the 22nd. So when you look at August, you've identified right now 5 dates that you will be meeting. The 1st, the 8th, the 17th, the 22nd, and the 23rd.
Do we want to talk about other things that others want to discuss, or do you prefer we hold that conversation?
I think what I would really benefit from is if folks want to send those things to Dr. Means, who can collect it, share it out with the board, and that we reconvene again. And I have no plan for tonight. So I don't know how to structure us in a way that will be really beneficial coming out of this conversation. So that would be my preference. I'm also more than happy to
we can make this
feedback on this.
If I may,
yeah.
If the board is open to it, if board members would like to send different topics to me, I will then share it out to the full board and we can make this an agenda item for your July 25th meeting. So you can keep progress moving forward. That's an option.
Yeah, I'd be very open to that. Okay. Mr. Meyer.
So I'm going to try to step way back and say, this is getting kind of tired. I keep saying this. So I've been doing this for a long time, and as has Sharon. And so I'll just speak for me. It seems that if history rhymes, as has happened with, to my thinking, every other board, every group or, generation or whatever, the year 19 for me, whatever we do now will largely be abandoned in 3 years. It'll be just left behind and somebody else will come on, and not on purpose, but it's just kind of how it's always gone. And I struggle to try to get some idea about how to do something that's lasting, and not as a legacy about us, but for the district and for the children, that we figure out how to set up some structure that somehow will want to be adhered to. And I don't know how to do that. Or, right, I would have. I've never seen it done right. I don't know how to do it. I was president for three years, not continuously, but it just never happened. And so we have had our no short-term borrowing rule. And we've held to that. Well, that's been good. But when it comes to positively, proactively doing things to improve student behavior, and however you want to describe it, self-regulate. I mean, I don't know. We've never known as a board how to monitor what student services is doing. And in the past, student services has come up with numbers and statistics and data. And in the end, at the time I thought, and currently I think, those numbers never mean anything. It just happens to be numbers people put up, and, you know, it's almost like arrest statistics. You know, you don't really know if the right people are being arrested or why, or, you know, who's not being arrested and who's being targeted for arrest, and, you know. And so the next thing is student learning. I mean, how do we, you know, right. And now the plan structure, the strategic plan, these milestones, I've never quite seen anything like that before. So that looks really, really good. So that looks like a framework that, as we talk tonight about what are our indicators and what is our reporting cycle, and does it align with our management cycle? That here we are, we're stuck again, all the contracts get signed, all the money's spoken for, all the staffing decisions are made by the end of April, and now in the summertime, board looks at data and, well, there's at best a 1 year lag in our ability to affect behavior or structure of the organization in response to the data. So, you know, how do we really, truly effectively monitor student behavior so that board members don't find out whether things are working or not based on distressed parents calling or anecdotal conversations with parents? How do we as a board get the data about how we're doing in student service, you know, student services? Similarly with student learning, how do we do that? The third thing is we've lost sight of promoting enrollment. And we've all been a part of it. And so I think we need to get back to that because enrollment is our lifeblood. So, and sure, good student behavior and good student learning is huge, right? It's really what it's all about. But then there's the idea of having an attractive, exciting product. And I think that's where the equity and the diversity content, for example, could come into play. You know, that we have the extracurriculars that kids want, and we have the classes that kids want. And, you know, so there's the third pillar. We have the governance thing, and we just kind of neglected that. We really have neglected that, and we've gotten sloppy, bad, reckless. I believe reckless, to tell you the truth. But I think the three pillars of behavior, learning, and an attractive product, I sure wish we could worry less about governance and less about the finances and focus on those three things that are directly student related: the behavior, the learning, and the attractiveness of the product. But I truly don't know how to do it. But I truly, and I'll repeat myself, I've never seen it done well. And I have this hope that if we do it well with a calendar with very clear timing for reports and decisions and things like that, we lay it out we get our art people to lay it out in some artistic graphic that people can like, oh yeah, now I see what we're supposed to do all year. that there'll be something 4 years from now that will have an ongoing life, not about us, but about we've made it a better place for Wauwatosa with how our board culture. I don't want culture to become about us. I want our cultural focus to be about the students. So there. I hope I've shown some humility in this. I don't think it's been figured out in 20 years. And I've been here. So my fault too. Okay, thanks.
I'm not suggesting I figured it out, but at all, believe me. But I think what Mr. Meyer has shared, that's what we want to accomplish with the strategic plan. I think in terms of legacy, in the boards I've worked with in the past, it's through your policies. I have a quick story. I'll make it very quick because of the hour. In a prior district that I worked in, we developed a policy around equity and ensuring that all students were treated in an inclusive way. And that policy led to that school district's high school having a transgender student elected to the prom court, which it made national news. That happened because of the policy. And so those board members have the ability to say, I was part of developing a policy that really represented our values. So I think that's where legacy comes into play. If you can give me one more week with this team that started July 1st, we are close to having a timeline that we would provide bi-monthly updates from each division in terms of metrics that are being completed, reports that will come to you on either a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis. All of those components are really important. I gave you a book. I think everyone has it, which is it's by someone who's really respected in education, Michael Fullen. And he talks about good governance and the 5 themes of good governance. And perhaps as you think about what you want to accomplish, if we can just review that again, or you could go back to the key words of school boards and that's a really quick read as well. But I think what Mr. Meyer has shared, we would ask that if you give us a little bit of grace as we put these systems in place, but as in my first year, and it's not accusatory or anything, those systems that you're referencing that most school districts rely on, that boards rely on so they can make good decisions, we have to rebuild or construct. But we're going to get there. We have ideas on how to create those feedback loops for the community and how to structure the work in a way where the board you don't have to ask for things, but we're responsible for giving it to you. You should never have to be in a mode of having to trust our data. You get to decide what's important in student services to measure within the strategic plan, and then we're accountable for measuring it. So on the 17th, when we're discussing the strategic plan, if there's something you want pulled out of student services, that's the time to tell us.
So I'm saying, I like what you're saying, Dr. Means, but I'm saying something different. I think perhaps we need a policy that's plain language, simple, that states our annual board calendar about when we're going to review what and what the criteria will be. And I'll give you an example to me that proves of how we failed. The superintendent's annual evaluation used to be in the summer, and we've almost lapped ourselves with, we don't do the superintendent. We've lost almost a year on the superintendent's evaluation over time. Every year it takes a little bit more than a year to do it. So over 18 years, we've lost a year. How can that be when the budget cycle is annual, right? When the student data cycle is annual, that the board has, on a regular ongoing basis over generations of board members, slipped on our superintendent evaluation by maybe what, 9? I don't know. It used to be done in the summer. And now we're working. You see what I mean? There's something that's not tight about how we organize ourselves. And I'd suggest it's got to affect the students. You know, I'm just, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'll just throw that out there.
You know what I would say is, Mr. Meyer, when I stepped into the presidency last time, I had asked for that calendar and was surprised it didn't exist. I had asked for that calendar and was surprised it didn't exist.
Or if you finally got a calendar, did it really speak to you?
And it did. You know, it was implicit. The learning curve.
Yes.
Because of the board policy of, and I am pro a term limit to the presidency. After 2 years, last time I was ready to not be president. But it also means that institutional knowledge is lost, and so the documentation of it. I understand what you're saying, and I think to make sure that we've got kind of all of our reports in place. And I think Dr. Means, I'm experiencing you doing that, of packaging reports of here's all the technology, here's teaching. And so I think there's ways to do that over a calendar year. It may take a little while for us to structure that. And there certainly will be other things added in, but we know that there's certain times, we know when the budget meeting is going to be. And codifying that, I think, is something.
It's a changing culture. You asked a question earlier this evening during the board meeting around the life cycle of technology. You should know. You should know. And annually we should have, and I think I shouldn't say, I know Jamie has an inventory of our life cycle of the technology, but you don't receive it annually. And I think those are the little things that you're asking for. So then I don't want to be in a position where I'm asking you to trust me. I want to be in a position where you are clear as a board in terms of what tools you need to govern. And then we create those reports. But all of that comes out of the strategic plan. And so your ability to be explicit in it is really key. That's one piece, the strategic plan. The second is policy. And so if this board doesn't want to ever short-term borrow, and I've worked in districts where it's in policy that we say, here's the threshold of our fund balance. We will never go under it. And it's in the policy. So if that's the work of the board. And then you take the strategic plan, you take your policy, and you utilize those tools as your North Star to build the budget. So then that's when you're able to ask the questions such as, so where are we sending our personnel? Are we actually addressing the disproportionality through certain things? I don't believe you've been positioned to have those types of conversations, yet you are thirsting for it. I would just ask if you can give us 2 more weeks, which is ask. And I'm proud of our team of being in a position to do it in the next 2 weeks. But I believe in the next 2 weeks, we will have a foundation for you to really dig into, and we want you to tear it apart and make it your own. Because ultimately, I think Mr. Meyer said it, the tighter you are, the tighter the organization will be in terms of our focus on student learning and social, emotional, mental health and diversity and inclusion. Those are the things that have bubbled up through our strategic planning process.
Mr. Phillips?
Sure. Where my mind goes, and I hear it peppered throughout everyone's comments, is after we have the strategic plan, how do we enable that, right? Is it through what we can control? I feel like resources and being proactive about our resources and making sure they're aligned to the strategic plan. Policy is aligned and enabling the strategic plan. What else? I mean, I heard communication and feedback. Like, what else could we do, to your point, Mike, about creating structures that outlast us, right? We could all not be here tomorrow, right? So how do we enable that strategic plan to be enacted and with that fidelity, whether that's through a bunch of different committees, or whether that's through one committee of the whole, or like, how does that happen? That feels like that's the next step for us, is not only not to create the, that's great to create the strategic plan and approve it, but how do we enable that to really hit the ground running and align our resources and our strength as a governing body so that he knows exactly, and everybody has a clear understanding of where we're going, how we're going to get there, how we align the resources to ensure that it happens, tearing down pathways, whether it's legislative advocacy, whether it's, tearing down, hindrances to us enabling the work that we need to do. So I hear what everybody said. I hear the exact same thing, and that's where my mind goes to.
So something comes to mind when Dr. Mead started. You said, we don't have systems. Well, from what you're saying, it makes me think, well, as a board, we don't have a system. We're just kind of winging it with helper reminders from the superintendent.
We have a system that's just very reactive.
Right. Well, we need a structured, whatever Dr. Means is talking about for the departments. Well, maybe what's good for them is good for us too, and he can help us get a system.
We digest things in such big chunks at such short intervals, like to be able to break them down and to really get proactive about them and kicking them out there and thinking about them in maybe a smaller group and with community engagement and stakeholder engagement, I think would be helpful for us.
I'm going to shift informal. We'll go to Jenny and then to Leanne.
Thank you. Yes, this is exactly what I've been asking for, because I appreciate all that you are doing, Dr. Means, and your administrative staff and kind of how they're lining things up for us. But what I feel like is missing here is how the board functions. So as somebody who's new, I can tell you, it doesn't make any sense. Like when we get information in what order things are, how they're connected. And there is you were saying before, I think, Eric, that things are like there's an implicit calendar that someone's supposed to know about. But when you're new, you have no idea what this is until it hits you. And so you can't.
3 years in, you'll get it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Second term, really great. So if we could, I would love to see there being consistent work, and part of our time always spent on board culture and board education, like that to be built into what we're working on. Because I agree with you, Mike. I wish that we never had to talk about board culture and we could just talk about what our students need, but I think they're interconnected. And when we don't have a really strong functioning board, we are not doing the best for our students. And so I think we have to have these two things together, lock and step. And it's not just for right now. It's not just for, summer 2022, but like you said, we're going to probably have some new people on our board and so on and so on and so on. And so how do we build that structure and system in place so that everybody coming in has the same readiness to be able to function as part of this board?
So the two things that I was going to say is that one, from what I've learned from talking with other board members across the country, we are not alone in the struggle. And I feel like all of us who've been here a little while longer feel like we have been asking for this for years. And so to your point, like we haven't figured it out, but like we wanted this.
Right.
But what gives me a little bit of hope here is that the moment you came in, Dr. Means, and said we're missing systems and structures, I was like, yes, there's not actually a project management plan that has all the things where you can say, here are all the things that we need to come back to next year or in 18 months or in 2 years or whatever. So I appreciate what you're highlighting. And I think part of the challenge has been the work has been in such silos. Jenny, to your point, like it all seems very disparate. I think, when I think about the next several months and whatnot, what would be very helpful to me, and I'll just speak for myself, is being able to see 3 months out, 6 months out, what are we checking in on in January? What are we checking in? Even if we just did it quarterly, and I know, Eric, that I've seen that like fake me out calendar.
The what calendar?
The fake me out calendar. Okay. Like this is what we should be talking about. We actually won't talk about this because there's going to be 18 million emergencies. So that is something that I know I would find really helpful so that I could be making the connections to how these things fit together. Because tonight I'm like, oh, that sounds great about this art technology, but is that in the budget? Like, is this just some random ask? Because that used to happen all the time. So I would be really excited about seeing this as well. It feels really good that it sounds like we're all on the same page and wanting this. Two things that I would just ask for. One is with the WSD presentation, I'm sure you all have been in the same boat where you've just sat through really long sit and get. If there is reading that they are asking us to do ahead of time, if that expectation can be made, and if we could actually do application-based stuff. So I don't want to be told what I need to be doing. I want them to bring me here's a situation, work through it as a board. What would you do? And then them say like, did you consider this? Or did you consider that? What resources did you consider? Who could you have talked to? Should you have called in legal, et cetera, et cetera? Here's why that board meeting is allowed. Here's why that board meeting wouldn't be allowed. So that's my first request. And my second request is one thing that I don't think we've figured out yet, and it could just be that I'm like I don't like Gmail. We get so much information, and I know that we can't reply back to one another, but I think there are some topics where there's lots of information that if it could live in a Google Doc that nobody can edit, but everybody can see. So for instance, all of the communication that's been coming around certain topics, so that instead of me having to sort through 9 million emails to find the response I'm looking for, that would be so super helpful. And it would create a history for new board members to come in to be able to look back and say like, oh, that's all the stuff that happened around X or Y. Those are sort of my
I have quick answers. So yes, in working with Mr. Forbes and Dr. Neerad, Sharon made the same request. We have to make it scenario activity based. It can't just be a sit and get it. So that request has already been made. I will circle back and see if there's pre-reading that the board could digest. And in regards to your last comment, Board Docs is constructed to be that portal. It's
just never used it.
You've never used it that way. And to Mr. Phillips' point earlier, you talked about doing your work differently. Again, the way that your agenda is structured, if you are truly strategically focused, your agenda, if you go out and look at other school districts around the country, their agendas are based on the goal statements. And what are you doing in academic performance? What are you doing in diversity and inclusion? What are you doing in social, emotional, and mental health? Mr. Price has shown me that Board Docs, again, has the ability to structure items in a way where we can track to see how often are we talking about these things.
So I will say this is, I'm sure, largely me and my age and my generation. And I'm just going to say this just in case there's agreement somewhere. Google Docs and Google Mail to me is largely worthless. And my wife loves it. She's probably made a Kappa long ago. She's really smart. I can't figure out Google Docs for the life of me. Google Mail, I'm in love with Microsoft Outlook Mail.
Thank you.
Whatever. It is so easy to structure and organize and search and all this kind of stuff. It seems like Google is made for some fluffy head generation that can't focus on organization, So I know, shoot me for being, I shouldn't say that. Do something to me for being generationally prejudiced. But if you know a better way, I sure would like to see it.
Board Docs is the whole purpose of the platform board. We haven't tapped into the power of Board Docs.
The power of Board Docs. Nobody has literally uttered that phrase, maybe.
It's an amazing tool. And so it answers Leanne's question there. It is supposed to be a place where you keep all your information. And if we were doing the work well, then Ms. Willis would have had a place to just say, so what have you been talking about for the last year? Because that's what she's thinking. She wants to know, so where are the documents? What have you been talking about?
Click meeting.
If there was a place, if we were using board docs, I've used board docs that way before.
Is that something that we could have Jamie put together a tutorial for us?
Jamie has been on me for the last year to say, he's been saying literally, we're not tapping into the full power.
Is he giggling somewhere, watching?
I'm sure there's a YouTube video.
There is a YouTube.
Since every school district uses the same platform.
I mean, there are elements of board. I'll just give you the one and then I'll turn it back over to you. But there's a scorecard component to board docs where if a community member wanted to just know if one item, what the vote was going to be, they can get an alert. They can be at the baseball game, but they can get an alert to say, here's the vote, and you get it immediately. There's just so many elements of board docs that we don't use that we could. And so it's for the last year, I've just been having this silly smile as I listen to all of you. I know where you want to go, and it's exciting to hear when you go back into the governance core book. What you have affirmed is that all 7 of you have coherence around what you want to see happen with this board. Because if you're tight, it will trickle down to the classroom. If you're not tight, that also trickles down to the classroom. And I think we've seen an element of that. It's been, since I've been asking for this work that we will eventually provide to you in the next 2 weeks, I was just talking to a couple of our administrators in the district office today. There seems to be a nervous energy in the building because they're used to the next crisis. And we're saying, don't brace for the next crisis. Think about your work and think about what we're trying to accomplish according to the strategic plan. Think about the tools that the board needs to know so they can monitor your work. We haven't had those conversations in a while here.
I'm going to just do a quick summary. So I'm hearing kind of multiple things, and we'll need to figure out kind of how these fit together. One is an annual calendar of what we want to see, when we want to see it. Some of it will be quarterly, some of it biannual, some of it annual in terms of scorecards, data, kind of monitoring that we will do as a board. There's also topics that will come up, annual reports that we'll see, and that we've gotten some of those historically, some of them we may want to do, and we want to consider whether or not to build that into policy so that that's articulated going forward and what that looks like. We want to talk about what does our committee structure look like and how does that support the implementation of the strategic plan. We've talked about a variety of different committees over time. We have one now that's currently active, legislative advocacy, that Leanne and I are currently placed on. And then I think there's a variety of different committees that we have talked about over the years, recently or not recently, of does it make sense that there be board committees in different ways. And so I think that's a conversation point. And then there's how do we structure the meetings in general? So how do what's the type of information we want to hear? Where do we want to focus and spend our time? A question I have that I would like the board to consider is, to what point do we need as many conversations about the deep dive into some of the detailed budgetary approval items? What do we need written reports on? And if we want to, on the consent agenda versus pulling them off the consent agenda, to allow us more time to go deeper into more strategic conversations. I think that's a conversation for probably another time, but I would love your thoughts, kind of for you to give some thought to that. But my preference would be we spend a little bit more time on the strategic decisions and not some of the budgetary decisions, unless we have a specific thing that we want to. I want to know the information about the computers for this evening, but if we don't have questions on it, I'd rather spend that 20 minutes on something else, unless we've got 1 or 2 board members who want to pull that off the consent agenda. Something to think about. Ms. Mifo?
Thank you. Just one thing I didn't hear. audits and management response. That was a key investment that we made, and it will move our work forward. So I have just found that we have several things we're doing, and there should be updates for them every month, or, so if we're, having a calendar or however we're doing those updates, the work is happening, but we're really not telling anyone the work is happening. And it's concerning work that we're making progress on, and it affects the student experience. So, I just keep hearing student experience, and the way that we put things on the agenda and talk about things on the agenda helps move those initiatives forward and helps student experience, I think.
So the other one where I think, Sharon, where it connects is Leanne brought up earlier, when we implement an annual report on what's the status of implementation. There's the audit, and then there's here's something new. What were our metrics that we said we wanted to see? How we know if implementation's successful at this point in the game? That is something I think to codify as well.
So 2 things. I don't want to cast aspersions on Google. Okay.
I think you already did.
No. Well, I'm trying to correct myself here. That said, I qualified it with, I know I'm generational and all that kind of stuff. Okay. But whatever our platform is, we need standard practices so that people know how to find stuff, so that people know how to store stuff, so that people know how to communicate stuff. So if Google's our path, then we need to standardize so that things are organized, structured, stored, filed similarly across the organization. I had a really huge concern tonight that the back office is using Microsoft, and the educational group and us, we are using Google. How do we, effective rhetorical question, wouldn't we all communicate better if we were all on the same platform? So, and this calendar, if it could be put forth in whatever technical environment the smart people, like, the people who know, Board Docs is best, or Google is best, or Microsoft is best, let's put that straw dog up in the platform that somebody thinks it's really the direction to take, so that we can see it as it would really be used, and that would be a first step. Now, my other main comment here is that we had, and I'm going to explain my vote now, on the consent agenda, new positions for coaches. We had on the regular agenda boilerplate renewals of things we buy over and over again. It would seem to me that new things conceptually should be on our main agenda so we can understand why we're doing something new. And that annual repetitive things could get some kind of review by a committee or subgroup of the board or something like that. It seemed like we were backwards with, not on purpose, but we spent a lot of time talking about repetitive renewals of things, and we didn't spend any time talking about new positions. And I just,
our policy is. Our policy dictates that happens.
That we talk about new things in the consent agenda?
That we talk about those renewals in the main agenda.
I understand. Yeah. I understand.
Yeah.
Or that
and we have the option to pull any new thing off of the consent agenda and talk about it.
Right. But I understand, but I'm not wanting to tip over the apple cart during the regular meeting. I want to describe here in this meeting, which is what this is for, that it just seemed kind of upside down to handle it that way, to spend so much time, and now we're going to be talking about quarterly reviews of data indicators. Well, we'd like to talk about, we're going to have to find time for those things in the regular meeting. So I just want us to look at that, if the first time something is approved, it ought to be a bigger wave than the renewal. That's kind of how I look at things. So thanks.
It would be nice to have some cadence of when we talk about just this, like how are, I don't know, maybe quarterly or twice a year, say, how are we doing? Are there any areas where we want to make improvements? Do we want to make sure that all of our, new positions end up on the agenda? But to be able to do that and have an opportunity to just say those things on a regular basis, so we're checking our process.
We have to add it to the agenda.
Or have a suggestion box where you just drop your. Yeah. Seriously.
Yeah. Or even, right, to have, honestly, I have heard through conversation, I'm supposed to just tell the president that if I want something on the agenda, but I have to be honest, that there's no orientation that tells you that. I don't really know how to get things on the agenda.
It's in our policy. But it's not, there's no manual. That's it. It's just a lot.
Are we at a good start, stopping place for this evening? Yeah. So, good conversation tonight. I think it's moving us forward. I want to encourage folks to continue to think about this, to shoot Dr. Means an email for the time being, at least on Gmail. Send a hard copy if you want. Send a hard copy. You could print something off and place it on his desk, which will be our current suggestion box. Sure, he'll love that. And we will convene this conversation again in the not too distant future. We'll put this on our agenda for our first kind of meeting conversation about some strategic timelines of how to move these forward. This has been helpful for me to kind of get a sense of where people's thoughts are. I heard again and again tonight the importance of codifying and updating policy in a whole lot of different ways, from as a way of leaving legacy, as a way of documenting, for in essence a gift to future boards so that they've got a roadmap, and a gift to ourselves, and then how policy can kind of hold us tightly to help us move forward in a collaborative fashion. So good conversations everybody tonight. Could I get a motion to adjourn? It is 9:34.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Ms. Weedfield. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fraley. Dr. Means, do you want to call the roll? Do you want me to?
Yeah, I can say need to. Ms. Willis,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Dr. Hoyk.
Yes.
Ms. Weedfield.
Yes.
Mr. Meyer.
Yes.
Ms. Fraley.
Yes.
Dr. Joseph Baker.
Yes, we're convened. Thank you all.